In this video, I'm going to show you how to glue different types of collage papers using 3 of my favorite products with absolutely no bubbles. Hello, my name is Catherine Rains. I'm a mixed media collage artist, and welcome to Tune In Tuesday, where I share weekly art demos to expand your mixed media toolbox. If you see value in my art demos, I would deeply appreciate a thumbs up, and if you would subscribe to my channel below. Links for all the supplies to successfully glue your papers are down below. And while you're there, you might want to check out my free 5-day online workshop, Collage Kickstart, where I show you how to use all the collage papers taught during Tune In Tuesday to make fabulous collages the very first try. So let's get into gluing our collage papers without bubbles. To start our discussion about how to glue, let's talk about what glues to use. So my 2 favorite glues that I use back and forth depending on the weight of a paper is matte medium and gel medium. Now you see Liquidex and Golden here. I also use a Nova brand. Really doesn't matter what brand you use. They're very equal in my book, but I use a matte medium if I'm gluing thinner paper, like a magazine, a tissue, something that's very lightweight. I'll use a gel medium for a lot of my painted collage papers. Those are the ones that are thicker in weight. They might be a drawing paper, could be a watercolor paper. It just needs a thicker glue. You're actually going to see me using these products in smaller containers. So my matte gel is actually in this small jar. If you open it up, it's just kind of a gel-like consistency. The reason I put it in smaller jars is because if I actually take the glue out of its larger container, it'll expose the glue to a lot of air, and that will make it dry up very quickly. So I keep it in a smaller container, and I don't keep that much of it in this container. I just keep refilling this. For the matte medium, I also put it in another container. This is just a condiment bottle that you can get from the grocery store. The reason I love this is because I can just literally pour it out and then use a paintbrush to spread it around. It just makes it very quick. And again, it means I don't have to open up the larger container and expose it to air that could prematurely dry it out. So I want these products to last as long as possible. Now, another glue choice that I actually used probably for the first 25 years of making collages is just a regular old glue stick. For the most part, these are acid-free, so you want to make sure it actually says acid-free on the container. So I will show you how to use this form of glue as well. And I still use a glue stick, but usually when I'm traveling. So I don't want to bring a glass jar or something liquid like this. A glue stick is a really nice alternative. Other supplies that are useful when gluing, I absolutely love a catalyst wedge. And if you can't get a catalyst wedge, just a room key or a credit card. And I also have a flat brush for actually spreading both of these glues out. So I have pulled out some different weights of papers that I typically use in my collages. I'm going to show you when I would use a gel medium versus a matte medium and give you a little bit of the technique I use in getting papers down without bubbles. So let's start with a collage paper that actually has a potential of bleeding if I put a matte medium on it. Now, this is a marker that I've put on a piece of copy paper, and I know this paper will bleed because if I wet my finger a little bit and put it on the paper, you can see that some of that marker is actually coming off on the paper. So when I know that I have a piece of paper that has a potential of bleeding or smearing, what I'll do is put one of these 2 products on it first, if I don't want it to smear. So this is the one I prefer. It's called a Workable Fixative by Krylon. One spray will seal that so that I can glue it down without any kind of smearing. Spectrafix is also a good choice, but it takes usually several coats. So you spray it on, you let it dry, you spray it on again, let it dry. I would give it 3 coats just to be sure. Because it takes more coats, I usually go with the Workable Fixative, although this is an aerosol, so it's not as environmentally friendly, particularly if you're doing it indoors like I usually do. However, in this case, I'm okay with it smearing a little bit. Sometimes the smear actually adds to the artwork. So I am just going to take a little piece of this off. Just tear a typical piece off for me. Now, because of the weight of this paper, pretty thin paper, I could really go with a matte medium or a gel medium, but I think I'm gonna go with a matte medium. And by the way, you could use matte medium or gel medium for all of your gluing. So I just pour a little bit down, spread it out with my flat brush, put this down, and then I'm going to also spread out some of those bubbles with my brush. Now, just to be sure, I will use my finger just to spread out the bubbles. Now, with this particular paper, it's going down completely flat. No bubbles whatsoever. Didn't give me any issue. So let's try another paper that potentially could get bubbles when we actually put some glue on it. So this is a good example. This is a piece of magazine. This is actually one of my very favorite pieces of magazine. I've actually cut this out from many, many magazines. So I'm just gonna cut off a little piece of this here. Now, again, this is a very thin piece of paper. Now, if you're using thin magazine papers, one of the best things you can do is to lay it back on its reverse side and get a spritzer or a water bottle. I like the spritzer because it gives a very fine spray. And you basically just give it a very light spray, just enough to relax the paper. Then I put some more glue down. And again, I'm using the matte medium for this, and just lay it down. And again, I'm going to use my brush to push out a lot of those bubbles. And I'm going to use my finger to pull out any more that might be there. And I have no bubbles at all. It went down completely flat. Another hazard with using magazine pieces is, can you see this smear right here? This magazine, the ink on it actually came off onto the book. Now, because I'm a mixed media collage artist, usually that smearing doesn't bother me, but I could have put some Spectrafix on it. That is one possibility. Actually, the more I do this, the more that ink comes off. But I also can put something else on here, like I can cover it up so you don't see it. I could also use hand sanitizer and clean that up. So just squirt that on there, just take a little soft cloth, and most of that smear would actually come up. But again, I'm usually okay with the smear. However, I also don't want a lot of that ink to come off of here. So let's try another piece of magazine. I'm just gonna tear a little piece off of here. Now, again, this is a very flimsy piece of magazine. Okay, so I think I'm gonna put it right here, kind of overlapping a little bit. Now, this magazine is already distressed. I've already done some sanding on the magazine itself. However, let's say that I really don't want any more of that ink to come off, like there's some ink that came off of here. So one way to prevent the ink from coming off is, again, I would glue it down, the bottom layer, place this where I want it. I'm going to do a really light gluing on top, because I don't want to push too much of that ink off of the page. And then I can take a piece of plastic. Now, this is just a plastic, I think it's a plastic file folder. You could use a page protector, put it over it, and I can actually rub this either with my hands like this to get the bubbles out, or I can use my catalyst wedge to get the bubbles out. Pull this up, and it is completely flat. There are no bubbles whatsoever. For this one, I actually did not put any water on it. So every piece of magazine, if you're using magazines in your collages, will act a little differently. You can't predict ahead of time, at least I can't predict ahead of time, whether this is going to give me a lot of issues with bubbling or not. The safer route is always to put a little bit of water on the back of it before you glue it down. Just so happens I didn't do it on this one, and it glued down perfectly fine. Suppose we have a piece of heavier paper. So this is a piece of drawing paper. It's got a lot of layers of paint on it, so it's fairly heavy. You can hear it when I flip it like this. And I want to attach this to my little collage. I'll take a little piece of this. Now, because it's a heavier piece of paper, I am going to use my matte gel. So again, I'm just going to paint it on. Now, I'm using the same paintbrush. And for one session of me gluing things down, because I usually glue things down all at the same time, I don't need to keep putting this in water. It's going to stay wet enough, usually. As long as I don't keep this out too long out of the water, it'll be fine, you know, for like maybe 15 minutes of gluing. So I'm going to put this right here. But now I'm going to put gel medium on top, and I'm just going to use my finger to push out any bubbles. And there are a few there, I can see. And there's a little bit of smearing. This happens to be a kind of paper. It's actually paste paper. And paste paper, which I have a video on paste paper, it does tend to smear. So the best thing I could have done would be to put a fixative on it before I put it down. But again, in a sketchbook, I'm okay that I've got a little bit of red coming off of that. In fact, I can call that part of my collage, right? Yeah, that looks pretty good. So how about if I want to put some tissue on here? Now, this is molding paste tissue. I've got a few to choose from. I'll tell you which one I want to use. This one looks good. So the first thing I do when I do molding paste tissue, by the way, is I tear off as much of the excess tissue as I can, because I don't want the tissue to show. So I've got a nice piece of tissue right here. Yeah, that's gonna look nice. kind of lay it across here. By the way, how I'm laying things down actually is something that I teach in both Collage Kickstart, my free 5-day class, there's a link in the description below this video, as well as in Collage Joy. So I'm using some kind of basic design principles of laying down contrasting sizes and colors to make a good composition. So again, for a tissue, I'm going to use a matte medium, thinner glue, and I'm just going to lay this in the matte medium. You have noticed that I've got a lot of glue on the sides. That's perfectly fine. I'm actually using that glue to help glue down this piece. And I'm just going to kind of scrape up my excess glue with the brush. But because I use a matte medium, so this is matte, not a gloss, the matte, even though you see a little residue of glue right here, it will completely dry clear. So what I do to get this to be as see-through and transparent as possible is I'm just going to use my finger to kind of push out, kind of one section at a time. I'm trying to push out that glue. And as I go, it's becoming more transparent underneath here. So there's kind of glue coming this way as I push. So I've got some extra glue sitting on the side there. Now, but I still have a little bit of tissue showing. So I'm going to take an X-Acto knife. And what I do while the glue is still very wet, I'm just going to very gently pull that tissue away. Now, the only time this is really necessary is when you put tissue on a dark background, which I just did. If you see it right here, you can't really see the tissue because it's on a very light background. So I don't really need to pull any of that tissue up. It really doesn't make any difference at all. But it makes a big difference when I'm pulling it up against a dark background. And actually, I just pulled up one of the dots, which is perfectly fine. I guess it didn't belong there. That one either. So when I make so-called mistakes, I just always figure it's meant to be. Now, the big drawback with doing this method against a magazine, so this bottom layer is magazine, is I'm also pulling up, if I'm not really careful, I pulled up a little bit of the ink there. Again, I could say that's part of the design. If I really want this to, have all of that black and not have the ink pulled up by my X-Acto knife, I'll scrape this very gingerly. So I'm pulling up even more of this. Now, I'm not going to take the time to scrape all in between here. That would take forever. However, just by doing it just on the edge of the tissue, that creates enough of an illusion that makes it look like that this tissue completely melted into the collage paper underneath it, which is what I'm looking for. Now, scraping is much easier when you do it on a heavier weight paper like this and you do it on magazine. I got some scratchy marks here. I don't have scratch marks and I'm doing it on this acrylic paper. So this is a paper that was painted with acrylic paint, and paste paper is actually also made with wallpaper paste. And again, there's actually a YouTube video on how to make paste paper if you want to learn how to make this particular paper. But typically as a collage artist, I use a combination of both papers I make, like this one, and this one's the one I made as well as papers I don't make. So this and this are both magazines. So I use both in my work. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Now you can see a little bit of wrinkling going on here with the tissue, not with the magazine pieces. Again, I'm just being as careful as I can so that I don't scratch up some of the ink. I think that's good. We're gonna go with that. Now, one more type of paper I wanted to show you is deli paper. Now, deli paper is something that is used in the US to wrap up sandwiches. So you can buy packages of this. The way I buy it is I buy maybe 25 sheets of this black and white, but I've never been able to buy it just the black and white by itself. Maybe I'll find a link to it. But at the moment, I have to buy 25 sheets of yellow and white, and black and red and white, and black and white, and green and white. So I get a whole variety pack. But it's the black and white that I use. So this particular paper shows up in a good number of my collages. I absolutely love this stuff. Just adds a pop of interest to my collages. I think I'm going to do something really simple like that. Tear a piece off here. Now, the cool thing about deli paper is that once I put matte medium on it, it's a very thin paper, so it's matte medium, is that it's going to show everything underneath of it. So I'm just going to see where I might want to show some things underneath. So it actually shows that writing, which I think is pretty cool. Let's see where I might want to put this. I don't want to put it over the molding paste because the molding paste has some texture to it. Yeah, I think I'm just going to put it right here. Kind of like it hanging off the side. Get a little smaller piece. Okay. So So I'm gonna put some matte medium. I'm not that precious as I'm putting this out like this. It's not like it's all completely even. Then I'm just going to gently lay this down in it. The challenge with using a deli paper is that this ink on here is very unstable and it likes to bleed, just like this wanted to bleed and this wanted to bleed. So I'm very careful about pushing the bubbles out very gently with my finger. And there might be a little bit of, bubbles left in there, but there actually is a little bit of ink that I have pulled off just by doing that. And again, I like a little bit of a distressed look, so I'm okay with that. But if you want it to stay completely black and white and have no ink come off, you can even see it coming off the side there, you might want to spray it or put a piece of plastic on top of it. So you're actually pushing the bubbles out over a piece of plastic. But I actually like it being a little distressed like that. And you see some more of that black coming off. So I think that looks pretty cool. I like it, but it's not perfect. So I can see, as I look at it sideways, I can see a little bit of bubbles, and I'm gonna get as much as I can of those bubbles out just by pressing straight down and kind of rolling my finger over them. But that looks good enough for me. Let's do one more piece of paper glued down, but with a matte gel. This is a piece of book page. It's a music score that's pretty thick. And that's really how I judge whether I'm going to use the matte gel or the matte medium. So for this, I'm going to use the matte gel. And now I just need to make a decision about how big this piece of paper will be. I love that torn edge, so I'm going to try to incorporate that torn edge into this quick collage I'm making. I like that. Put some matte gel on my brush. And again, I use the matte gel on top as well as part of spreading it out. And I will use my finger, make sure that the bubbles are out. But on the thicker papers, there won't be that many bubbles. So the thicker the paper, the less you have to struggle with bubbles. Now I'm gonna put a different kind of tissue down just because, I don't know, this collage is just calling for gold for some reason. So take a big piece of my gold tissue paper. This is just gold paint that's been placed down through a stencil on a piece of tissue. People ask me all the time what kind of tissue I use, and I use the cheap stuff, meaning I go to the drugstore and I don't get expensive tissue paper. I don't need to. If you have wet strength or acid-free tissue paper, that's probably the ideal. However, I've been using cheap grade tissue paper for so long and it holds up incredibly well for the work I'm doing. So because this is see-through, I'm trying to find a place that would be really cool to have something see-through. That is where I want it. Either that, or it might be cool to have it up here. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna make it a smaller piece. Make it a little sliver. It'd be fun to have that music score show through a bit. Again, it's really thin paper. Now this is probably more glue than I need, but I can use the same glue to put on top of this. Yeah, that's really nice. And again, I'm just gonna very gently, oops. Okay, there's the hazard. I just pulled up part of the tissue. But again, when that happens, I'm like, okay, well that was meant to happen, but I'm gonna see if I can fit that back on there. I can figure out where I accidentally pulled it off. It just demonstrates how gentle you have to be. So I'll just put it right back there as if it was meant to go there all along. Put a little more glue on top. And again, because this is a matte glue, it is going to dry completely clear. Now you might see some tissue underneath. So there's some white tissue right there on top of that black. So that will still show a little bit, but actually that's fine for me. Okay, I'm being extra careful because I accidentally pulled some off of here. And for the most part, that looks good. Now this is a very thin piece of book page that I've just done some drawing on top of. So I'm going to use the matte medium for this. Again, this is a book page. So I'm going to use the matte gel. And I'm laying this on really thick because having this moisture gives me some cushion to push out the bubbles with my finger. But I don't usually have near as much problem with the thicker papers anyways. The bubbles usually come out fairly easily. It's the magazine pieces or very thin pieces of paper that have a tendency to bubble, which is when you want to put some water on the back of them, although it's not necessary for all papers. Sometimes you get away with it and it goes down flat without it. Yeah, I'm going to finish this off with one more piece of magazine paper. This is pretty thin. Now again, it's a thin piece of paper, so I'm going to lay this down and spritz it a little bit, just as an insurance policy, so it's lightly wet. And before I put it down, make sure I know where I want to put it. Now it almost becomes transparent a little bit when you put the water on it, but once this completely dries, it won't be transparent. The transparency will go away. So you can see the little black and white underneath of this, but that will not stay. Now this is a good example. This one actually has some bubbles in it. So that's why having a lot of matte medium helps me actually to glide those bubbles out with my finger without hurting the paper. And they're pretty much gone. Now you can actually see the image that was on the reverse side of this magazine, but that again, that will go away once this completely dries. And that's it. Now let me show you one more. I want to show you how to do this same idea, but with a glue stick. Now the way I use a glue stick is I get an old catalog or an old magazine that I'm not going to be using, and I flip it open to an unused page. And let's say I want to glue down this piece of paper. So I will take this, put it face down on my magazine, and I am going to add a very thick coating of the glue stick, and I'm pushing it off into the magazine. So it's completely covered, but the extra glue is going onto the magazine. Now, ideally, I don't want this little piece of paper to move as I do it. It's actually moving under my hands, but that's fine too. It's not going to hurt it. And I just flip it up. And again, I'm just going to very gingerly press it down. I find that glue sticks are easier to use. They lay down flatter. However, I really like the layering of a matte mediums, which is why I prefer to use a matte medium for this rather than a glue stick. However, this is much easier in terms of getting a flat surface. The matte medium actually encases this, and I could put a matte medium on top of this, but I generally don't. So I would just keep layering different pieces, just using the glue stick, one piece on top of the other. And because it glues down fairly flat, you don't really need anything else. You don't need a wet surface in order to push the bubbles out. They push out fairly easy, which is why I use this for travel, and I also used it for the first 20-something years of my collage career. Love this thing. So the other cool thing about using a glue stick is that when I'm done putting this piece down, I just turn the page and I've got another clean piece of paper in which to glue a second piece down. I just put it down and I glue it on top. So you just keep flipping the pages. So it's a really easy way to kind of keep a clean surface. And this collage is now dry. You can see there's no translucency here. So the image that was actually on the opposite side of the magazine piece is now invisible. You can't see it. Let me give you one more option for glue. So this is what I use, matte medium. However, gloss medium also works great. Many collage artists actually use gloss medium in their work. The reason I don't, because when a collage dries and if I used gloss, I would see a shine around the edge where I had painted over where I'm going to put a piece down. However, in order to get a matte medium, which is the same product as this, but they had to put some kind of additive to this to take the gloss out. So theoretically, it creates a little bit of a cloud. However, I have never experienced that. So I have always gone with the matte medium just because it dries so beautifully. In a future video, I'll actually show you how to finish off a collage with varnish and wax. But for the time being, we're going to let this just sit here in my sketchbook, and I'll show you some options in a couple weeks. Thanks for joining me for Tune In Tuesday. To learn many more collage making techniques, check out the links that are about to appear right here. And be sure to join my free 5-day online class, which you can sign up for under More below. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I would be deeply grateful if you would. I'll see you back here next week for Tune In Tuesday.